Jack Harrison sat alone at the corner of the Rusty Anchor bar, nursing his second beer of the evening. The glass was half empty, much like how he felt inside most days. 3 months back in civilian life after 12 years as a Navy SEAL, and he still felt like a stranger in his own hometown of Bayshore. The bar buzzed with the usual Thursday night crowd. Local fishermen shared tales of their catches, office workers unwound after long days, and college students celebrated the approaching weekend. Jack noticed all of this but felt separate from it, like watching a movie through a window. He ran, his finger down the side of his glass, collecting the condensation. His calloused hands told stories his quiet demeanor didn't. Stories of climbing mountains in Afghanistan, swimming through dark waters off coasts he couldn't name, and carrying wounded teammates across terrain that wanted to kill them all. "Yomai, seem deep in thought," said Olivia Pierce, sliding a bowl of pretzels toward him. The bartender had a kind smile that reached her eyes. "Need another beer?" Jack nodded. "Thanks. Just trying to get used to normal again." He didn't elaborate. Civilians rarely understood what normal meant to someone like him. Olivia seemed about to respond when Frank Miller emerged from the back office. The bar owner was a stocky man with thinning hair and permanent frown lines. He scanned the room like a prison guard in a yard full of inmates. "Livy, table 6 needs service," Frank barked, then narrowed his eyes at Jack. It wasn't the first time Jack had noticed the man's unfriendly stares. Olivia sighed. "Coming right up, Frank. I'll get your beer in a minute, Jack." Jack nodded and returned to his thoughts. He'd come to the Rusty Anchor hoping the background noise might drown out the silence in his apartment. The silence was always the hardest. Too much room for memories to creep in. His therapist at the VA had suggested community, engagement, whatever that meant. So here he was, engaging by sitting alone in a corner. His phone buzzed. A text from his former teammate Sam Wright. "Check in, brother. How's civilian life treating you?" Jack started typing a response when a loud voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, you planning to order something else or just take up space all night?" Jack looked up to see Frank Miller standing over him, arms crossed. The bar had grown busier in the last half hour, with several people looking for seats. "I was waiting for another beer," Jack replied evenly, maintaining the calm he'd learned through years of high-stress situations. "Your bartender was going to bring it over," Frank snorted. "Well, she's busy with paying customers. Either order something now or free up the table." Jack noticed Olivia watching from behind the bar, looking uncomfortable. Several nearby customers had quieted to observe the exchange. "No problem," Jack said, reaching for his wallet. "I'll have another beer and pay now." "Actually," Frank said, his voice rising slightly, "I think you've had enough. You military types can't hold your liquor worth a damn." The comment caught Jack off guard. He'd been nursing the same beer for nearly an hour and was completely sober. "Excuse me?" Jack asked, his voice still controlled but with an edge now. Frank leaned in closer. "You heard me. I've seen your type before. Think you own whatever place you walk into." A young woman at a nearby table was watching the exchange with wide eyes, her phone held loosely in her hand. Jack didn't notice her, focused instead on diffusing the situation. "I don't want any trouble," Jack said, standing up, slowly. At 6'1", he towered over Frank, but his posture remained non-threatening. "I'll just settle my tab and go." "Damn right you will," Frank said, seeming agitated by Jack's calmness. "In fact, just get out. Your kind isn't welcome here." "Theo." Bar had gone completely silent now. Olivia stepped forward. "Frank, come on, he's not causing any problems." "Stay out of this, Livy," Frank snapped. "I know his type. Comes back from wherever thinking he's some kind of hero. Probably never saw real action anyway." Something flickered in Jack's eyes. Not anger, but a deep weariness. He'd lost friends in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. He'd held men as they died and promised to deliver final messages to loved ones. He'd spent countless sleepless nights on high alert so others could rest. But none of that was this man's business. "I'll leave," Jack said quietly, putting a $20 bill on the table. "That should cover my drinks and then some." Frank snatched the money. "Yeah, You will leave. And don't come back. We don't need your kind bringing your problems in here. Several patrons looked away, embarrassed by the scene but unwilling to intervene. The young woman was now openly recording with her phone, though Jack didn't notice. As Jack turned to leave, Frank stepped forward and deliberately bumped his shoulder hard. Bet you weren't even a real SEAL. Probably just telling stories to impress people. Jack paused, a rush of memories flooding him. The brutal training at Bud's where only 14 of his class of 120 made it through. The midnight operations in waters so cold his body had nearly shut down. The times he'd had to make split-second decisions that meant life or death. For a moment, the bar seemed far away. Jack was back in the Hindu Kush, carrying Sam Wright on his shoulders for 11 miles after an ambush had left him with a bullet in his leg. Sam had begged Jack to leave him, but Jack had simply adjusted his grip and kept walking. "Frank!" Olivia's sharp voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Frank turned to her. "You questioning how I run my business?" While they argued, Jack quietly headed for the door. He didn't see the point in escalating things. The mission, having a quiet drink, was compromised. Time to extract. As he reached the door, Frank called after him. "That's right. Walk away. Don't come back to the Rusty Anchor. Military types aren't welcome." The door closed behind Jack, cutting off the words. The cool evening air felt good against his face. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deeply the way his team's medic had taught him to manage stress. Inside, the young woman, Kelly Wright, Sam's sister who was visiting Bayshore for the weekend, was already texting her brother about what she just witnessed. She hadn't recognized Jack at first, having only met him once years ago at Sam's promotion ceremony, but as soon as Frank mentioned SEALs, she'd made the connection. Jack walked slowly back to his apartment, the night suddenly feeling a little colder and his isolation a little more complete. He didn't know that by this time tomorrow, everything would change, not just for him but for Frank Miller and the Rusty Anchor as well. Kelly Wright stood outside the Rusty Anchor, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed her brother's number. The street lamp cast a yellow glow over her worried face. She had recognized Jack Harrison the moment Frank Miller mentioned SEALs. Jack had saved her brother's life 3 years ago, a fact Sam had only shared with the family after a few drinks during his last leave. Sam Wright answered on the third ring. "Hey, little sis, thought you were enjoying your weekend getaway." "Sam, I just saw something you need to know about," Kelly said, her voice low and urgent. "I'm at this bar in Bayshore called the Rusty Anchor, and Jack Harrison was here." There was a pause on the other end. "Jack? From my team?" "Yes, the bar owner just kicked him out. It was awful, Sam. He was just sitting there quietly and this jerk started saying terrible things about him being military, questioning if he was even really a SEAL. Jack didn't fight back or anything, just left, but the things that man said..." Sam's voice hardened. "Tell me everything." Kelly walked down the street as she explained the entire scene, including how Frank had physically bumped into Jack and the way the other customers had watched without helping. When she finished, Sam was quiet for so long that Kelly checked to see if the call had dropped. "Sam, you there?" "I'm here," he finally said. "Jack saved my life in Afghanistan, carried me 11 miles with a bullet in my leg. You know what he said afterward when I tried to thank him? We go home together or not at all. That's it. Never mentioned it again." Kelly leaned against a storefront. "The bar owner was horrible, Sam, and Jack just looked so alone." "Where's Jack living now?" Sam asked. "I don't know. I only recognized him because of that photo you showed me at your promotion." Sam sighed heavily. "Hold on a sec." Kelly could hear muffled voices as Sam covered the phone. She waited, watching people walk past, unaware of the story unfolding around them. "Kelly," Sam's voice returned, "I need a favor. Can you stay in Bayshore until tomorrow afternoon?" "I guess so." "Why?" "Because we're coming," Sam said simply. "The whole team." The next morning, Jack Harrison woke to the persistent buzz of his phone. He reached for it, squinting at the screen. 5 missed calls and a dozen text messages, all from numbers he hadn't seen in months. His former teammates, The most recent text was from Sam. Outside your apartment. Coffee's getting cold. Jack sat up quickly, confused. Last he knew, Sam and the team were on the USS Trident in the Persian Gulf. He threw on jeans and a t-shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and opened his apartment door. Sam Wright stood there holding 2 coffee cups, a grin spreading across his face. Morning, sleeping beauty. Sam. What the hell? Jack blinked, wondering if he was still dreaming. That's the greeting I get. After flying 20 hours to bring you decent coffee. Sam pushed past him into the apartment. Nice place. Very minimalist. Jack's apartment was indeed sparse. A couch, a TV, and a small table with a single chair. No pictures on the walls, no plants, nothing personal except a folded American flag in a display case and a single framed photo of his SEAL team. Sam, how did you even find me? Why are you here? Sam handed him a coffee cup. My sister Kelly saw what happened at the Rusty Anchor last night. Jack froze, cup halfway to his lips. What? She was there, recognized you from photos, called me right after. Jack set the coffee down untouched. So you flew all the way here because some bar owner was a jerk? That's crazy, Sam. No. What's crazy is you not calling any of us for 3 months. Sam's voice was casual, but his eyes were serious. And I didn't fly all this way alone. Before Jack could respond, his phone buzzed again. Go downstairs, the text read. Parking lot. Jack moved to the window and looked down. His heart stopped for a moment. In the small apartment parking lot stood 10 men in civilian clothes, arranged in a familiar formation that no one but military would recognize. The whole team? Jack asked quietly. Everyone who could make it on short notice, Sam confirmed. We were on leave after the Gulf deployment. When I called them last night, it wasn't even a discussion, it was just, what time are we leaving? Jack turned from the window, emotion threatening to overtake him. You shouldn't have done this. Maybe not, agreed a deep voice from the doorway. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Clark stood there, his powerful frame filling the entrance. As the team's senior enlisted leader, his presence had always commanded respect. But when have we ever done what we should, Harrison? Jack straightened automatically. Master Chief. Daniel Clark walked in and studied Jack's face. Unlike Sam's friendly approach, the Master Chief's assessment was direct and professional. You look like hell, son. I'm fine, Master Chief. Sure, you are. Daniel glanced around the bare apartment. This place looks like a fob in hostile territory. Temporary quarters, minimal exposure, ready to bug out. Jack couldn't argue with that. He hadn't unpacked most of his things, hadn't hung a single picture. Part of him was still waiting for deployment orders that would never come. The transition is taking some time, Jack admitted. Daniel nodded. Always does. But you don't have to do it alone. That's not how we operate. I didn't want to bother anyone. Jack looked down at his coffee. You all have your own lives, your own missions, Sam snorted. Yeah, like we're so busy. Pete's been building model ships in bottles. Says it helps with his fine motor skills. Better than your hobby, came a voice from the doorway, where Pete, Rodriguez, now stood with the others. All Sam does is try to beat his sister's high scores on arcade games. One by one, they filed into Jack's small apartment. Men he'd trained with, fought beside, trusted with his life. Men who knew him better than his own family. They brought noise and life into his quiet space, their easy banter filling the emptiness. So, Daniel said once everyone had quieted down, we heard about this bar, the Rusty Anchor. Jack shook his head. It's nothing, just some guy with a chip on his shoulder. Not nothing, Sam argued. Kelly said he disrespected you. Disrespected what? We do. I've been called worse, Jack shrugged. Not the point, Daniel said. His calm authority hadn't diminished in the slightest since retirement. We're not here because you need us to fight your battles. We're here because no one comes back from what we've done and should walk alone. The room fell silent as his words sank in. So what's the plan? Jack finally asked, recognizing the determined look his teammates shared. Daniel smiled slowly. Well, I was thinking we should pay this establishment a visit. but not how they're expecting. An operation to secure civilian territory, Sam added with a grin. For the first time in months, Jack felt something loosen in his chest. The weight he'd been carrying hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter somehow, shared among the men who stood in his apartment, his brothers in all but blood. When? He asked. Daniel checked his watch. The Rusty Anchor opens at noon. I say we arrive precisely on time. You know how I feel about punctuality, gentlemen. The team laughed, and Jack found himself joining them. Whatever happened next, he was no longer facing it alone. Frank Miller arrived at the Rusty Anchor at 10:30 that morning, 2 hours before opening time. His head hurt from too many drinks after closing last night. The confrontation with that military guy had put him in a bad mood, and he'd helped himself to several shots of whiskey after locking up. He unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights. Empty bottles needed to be cleared, floors needed mopping, and the cash register needed to be counted. Just another day running a bar that barely made enough to keep the doors open. Frank was halfway through wiping down the bar when the back door opened. Olivia Pierce walked in, her face tight with an expression Frank couldn't quite read. "You're early," he said. "We need to talk," Olivia replied. She'd worked for Frank for 3 years, and he'd never heard that tone from her before. "About what?" Frank asked, though he had a feeling he knew. "About how you treated that customer last night, the veteran." Frank returned to wiping the bar. "My place, my rules. Don't need his type in here." "His type?" Olivia put her hands on her hips. "You mean someone who served his country? Someone who was sitting quietly, not bothering anyone?" "You don't know anything about those military guys," Frank said. "My dad came back from Vietnam all messed up, drank himself to death, left us with nothing." Olivia's face softened slightly. "I'm sorry about your dad, Frank. But that doesn't make what you did right. That man wasn't causing any trouble." "Look, what's done is done," Frank said. "He won't be back. Problem solved." Olivia took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about quitting for a while now. After last night, I'm sure this is my 2 weeks' notice." Frank stared at her. "You're quitting over this one guy I kicked out?" "It's not just him. It's how you treat people. It's the comments you make. I can't do it anymore." Before Frank could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his beer supplier. "I have to take this. We'll talk later." Olivia nodded and headed to the storage room to count inventory. As Frank argued with his supplier about a late delivery, he didn't notice the group of men gathering across the street. Exactly at noon, 13 men stood outside the Rusty Anchor. They were dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, button-ups, but something about how they stood made them look different from regular customers. An older couple walking by crossed the street to avoid passing directly through their group. Jack. Harrison looked at the bar's entrance, his stomach tight with unease. "This isn't necessary," he said quietly to Daniel Clark. "Sure it is," Daniel replied. "Beer tastes better with friends." Sam Wright checked his watch. 12 noon exactly, shall we?" Daniel nodded. "Remember the plan. Keep it professional, just like we discussed." The men walked toward the entrance, with Jack reluctantly in the middle of the group. Daniel reached the door first and held it open as the others filed in. Inside, the Rusty Anchor was just starting its day. A few regular customers sat at tables, and a couple of tourists studied menus near the window. Frank Miller stood behind the bar, arranging glasses. He glanced up as the door opened, then froze as man after man entered his establishment. Olivia, who had been serving a table near the door, stepped back in surprise. The bar fell silent as 13 men in total walked in, moving with a coordinated precision that seemed almost practiced. Frank's eyes widened as he recognized Jack among them. Before he could say anything, Daniel Clark approached the bar. "Good afternoon," Daniel said pleasantly. "Are you the owner?" Frank swallowed hard. "Yes." "Excellent. My name is Daniel Clark, Master Chief Petty Officer, U.S. Navy, retired. My colleagues and I would like to rent your establishment for the afternoon if that would be acceptable." Frank blinked in confusion. This wasn't what he had expected. "Rent the What? The bar, Daniel clarified. Private party. We're willing. To pay, of course. He placed a thick envelope on the counter. This should cover the lost business and then some. Frank stared at the envelope. I don't understand. It's simple, Sam Wright said, stepping forward. We're having a team reunion and need a venue. Your establishment seems perfect. Frank's eyes moved from Sam to Jack and back to Daniel. Team? Yes, Daniel said calmly. SEAL Team 8. Well, some of us are retired now, like Jack here, but once a team, always a team, right, gentlemen? The men nodded, their faces serious but not threatening. One by one, they introduced themselves to Frank. Lieutenant Greg Patterson, Chief, Petty Officer Steve Lewis, Petty Officer Pete Rodriguez. Each name was accompanied by a firm handshake and direct eye contact. Frank automatically shook their hands, still trying to process what was happening. When all 13 men had introduced themselves, they stood in a loose semicircle facing Frank. The bar remained silent, the regular customers watching with interest. Now, Daniel said, about our private party. Frank found his voice. You want to rent the entire bar? Right now? If that's convenient, Daniel replied. If not, we can come back another time. Frank looked at the envelope on the counter, then at Jack Harrison, who was standing quietly among his former teammates. The realization of who he had thrown out the night before finally hit him. Frank stumbled over his words. Olivia stepped forward. Frank, they want to pay to rent the whole place. That's a good deal for a slow Thursday. Frank nodded slowly. Yeah, okay. Excellent, Daniel said. He turned to the few customers in the bar. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. The Rusty Anchor will be hosting a private event shortly. Please finish your drinks at your leisure. Your tabs have been covered. The customers looked surprised, but not unhappy. Free drinks were free drinks. They raised their glasses in thanks. Daniel turned back to Frank. There's one more thing. A condition of our rental. Frank tensed. Here it comes, he thought. The payback for last night. We'd like to establish a monthly tradition, Daniel continued. A day when veterans can gather here, a safe place. First month's expenses are covered in that envelope. Frank stared at him in disbelief. You want to bring more military people here? After what I said last night? Jack finally spoke. Everyone deserves a second chance. The words hung in the air between them. Frank looked around at the 13 men, decorated warriors who could have easily chosen revenge but were offering something else entirely. Olivia touched Frank's arm. It's a good idea, Frank. My brother would have appreciated a place like that. If he'd had somewhere to go, talk to people who understood. Frank looked at her in surprise. Your brother was military? Marines, Afghanistan, he didn't make it home. Olivia had never shared this with Frank before. That's why what you said last night bothered me so much. Frank's face flushed with shame. He looked back at the SEALs, at Jack, then at Daniel. Think, Frank said slowly. We might need to talk about this veterans gathering idea in more detail. Daniel nodded. We have all afternoon, and plenty to discuss. The afternoon sun streamed through the Rusty Anchor's windows as Frank Miller brought another round of drinks to the table, where Daniel Clark and several other SEALs sat. The remaining team members had spread throughout the bar, some playing pool, others looking at the old photos on the walls. So you were all on the same team? Frank asked as he set down the tray. For several years, Daniel replied. Some of us longer than others. Greg and I served together for almost 15 years. Greg Patterson nodded. Different missions, different places, but same team. Frank watched Jack Harrison, who stood near the jukebox talking quietly with Sam Wright and Pete Rodriguez. And him? Was he really a good SEAL? Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Jack Harrison is one of the finest operators I've ever worked with. 3 silver stars, 2 bronze stars with valor. But more importantly, he never left anyone behind. Frank looked down at his hands. I messed up pretty bad, didn't I? We all make mistakes, Daniel said. It's what we do after that matters. Across the room, Olivia approached Jack with a hesitant smile. I wanted to apologize for last night. I should have said something more. Jack shook his head. Not your responsibility. Still, she insisted. I've seen how people treat veterans before. My brother was a Marine. He came back from his third tour. Different. Nobody knew how to talk to him anymore. It's hard, Jack admitted. Coming back. Everything looks the same but feels different. Olivia nodded. That's exactly what he used to say. Like everyone was speaking a language he'd forgotten. What happened to him? Sam asked gently. He took his own life 2 years ago, Olivia said quietly. I keep thinking that if he'd had people who understood, people who'd been through what he had. Jack met her eyes. I'm sorry about your brother. That's why I got so angry at Frank last night, she continued. He doesn't understand what it's like. He just sees the uniform, not the person wearing it. Some people never will understand, Pete said, but others just need time and a different perspective. Near the bar, Frank was looking through the envelope Daniel had given him. Inside was far more money than the Rusty Anchor would make in a week. This is too much, Frank said, pushing it back toward Daniel. Consider it an investment, Daniel replied. In that veterans gathering idea we mentioned. Frank hesitated. About that, I'm not sure I'm the right person to host something like that. Given my views. Your views can change, Daniel said, if you want them to. Frank looked around at the men in his bar. They weren't what he had expected. There was no yelling, no fighting, no wild behavior, just men talking, laughing, sharing stories. They could have been any group of friends enjoying an afternoon together. My dad was in Vietnam, Frank said suddenly. Came back with problems, drank too much, got violent sometimes. I always blamed the military for what happened to him. Daniel nodded. War changes people. But isolation after service can be just as damaging. Your father needed help he probably didn't get. Yeah, Frank admitted. Back then, nobody talked about that stuff. We're trying to change that, Daniel said. Creating spaces where veterans can talk openly, where they don't have to pretend they're fine when they're not. As they talked, the door to the Rusty Anchor opened, and Kelly Wright walked in. She stopped just inside, surprised to see the bar full of SEALs. Sam spotted her and waved her over. Frank, this is my sister Kelly. She was here last night. Frank recognized her immediately, the young woman who had been watching and recording the confrontation with Jack. I remember, he said uncomfortably. Kelly looked at him coolly. I hope you're treating my brother and his friends better today. I'm trying to, Frank admitted. An awkward silence fell over the group until Pete clapped his hands together. Who's hungry? I'm starving. The kitchen's not open yet, Frank said. Cook doesn't come in until 5. I can cook, Jack offered unexpectedly. Everyone turned to look at him. What? I worked in a restaurant before I joined the Navy. Frank hesitated, then shrugged. Kitchen's yours if you want it. I'll help, Olivia volunteered. As Jack and Olivia headed to the kitchen, the atmosphere in the bar relaxed even more. Frank found himself drawn into conversations with different team members, hearing stories about places they'd been and things they'd seen, always carefully edited for security, but vivid nonetheless. Steve Lewis, a communications specialist, showed Frank photos of his 3 kids. Oldest one wants to join the Navy when she grows up. Her mother isn't thrilled. You miss a lot being away, Frank observed. Steve nodded. Too much sometimes. But we do it so they can grow up safe. In the kitchen, Jack moved with surprising ease, finding ingredients and preparing a simple but hearty meal of burgers and fries. You're good at this, Olivia noted as she helped slice tomatoes. Cooking is methodical, Jack explained. Follow. The steps get the result you want, makes sense. Unlike civilian life? Jack smiled slightly. Something like that. As the afternoon wore on, the smell of food filled the bar. Jack and Olivia brought out platters that were quickly emptied. More drinks were poured. Stories were shared. Laughter became more frequent. Frank found himself sitting with Daniel again as evening approached. I've been thinking about what you said, about creating a space for veterans. And, Daniel prompted. I want to do it, Frank decided. First Thursday of every month to start. The Rusty Anchor will be open for veterans and their families only. Daniel smiled. That's a good start. But I need help, Frank admitted. I don't know what they need, what to say, how to make it work. You're not alone in that, Daniel said. We'll help you set it up. Get the word out. Jack lives locally now. Maybe he could be your point person. Frank looked over at Jack, who was showing Kelly how to properly throw darts while Sam heckled them both. Would he even consider it? After how I treated him? Ask him yourself, Daniel suggested. Frank nodded and walked over to the dartboard. He waited until Jack had finished his turn, then cleared his throat. Jack, could I talk to you for a minute? Privately. Jack handed the darts to Kelly and followed Frank to a quiet corner of the bar. The other SEALs pretended not to watch, but Frank knew they were paying attention. I owe you an apology, Frank began. What I said last night was wrong. I judged you without knowing you, and I'm sorry. Jack nodded once. Apology accepted. There's something else, Frank continued. I'm going to start hosting a Veterans Night. Here, first Thursday of every month. But I need someone who understands what veterans need, someone they would respect. Jack raised an eyebrow. And you're asking me? Yes, Frank said. I know it's a lot to ask after everything, but you clearly have experience with this kind of thing. Your team respects you, and that means something. Jack was quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, he finally said. That's all I'm asking, Frank replied. As they rejoined the group, Olivia approached with a camera. Mind if I take a picture? For the wall? The team gathered together, arms around shoulders, Jack in the center. As Olivia counted down, Frank realized that his bar had transformed in just one afternoon. What had been just a business, and not a particularly successful one, suddenly felt like something more, something meaningful. The flash went off, capturing the moment. Frank knew it would be the first of many new memories made in the Rusty Anchor. 1 month later, Jack Harrison stood outside the Rusty Anchor, watching people arrive for the first official Veterans Haven night. The old wooden sign above the door now had a smaller sign beneath it that read, Veterans Haven, first Thursday of every month. Jack felt a mixture of pride and nervousness as he checked his watch. Almost 7 o'clock. Time to go inside. The bar looked different. Frank had rearranged the furniture to create more open spaces where people could move around and talk easily. Small round tables replaced the larger rectangular ones, making conversation more intimate. The walls, once bare except for a few faded beer signs, now displayed military memorabilia and photos donated by local veterans and their families. Frank spotted Jack and waved him over to the bar. They've been showing up for the past hour, he said, his voice excited but nervous. Already 30 people here. Jack looked around at the mix of faces. Some older men who clearly served in Vietnam sat near the window. A group of younger veterans, probably from Iraq or Afghanistan, played pool. A few people wore hats or shirts identifying their branch of service, while others gave no outward sign of their military connection. Good turnout, Jack observed. Better than I expected, Frank admitted. But some of them seem uncomfortable, like they aren't sure what to do. It's their first time here, Jack said. Give them space to find their way. Sometimes just being around others who understand is enough. Olivia emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of food. She had decided not to quit after all, inspired by the changes Frank was making. She had even convinced her mother to share some of her brother's photos for the wall display. Jack, there's someone here you should meet, she said, nodding toward a corner table where an older man sat alone. Jack followed her gaze. Who is he? His name is Bill Carter, Marine Corps, Vietnam. He's been coming to the bar for years but never talks about his service. Today he brought this. She pointed to a framed photo on the wall showing a much younger Bill with his unit in Vietnam. Jack nodded and walked over to the man's table. Mind if I join you? Bill Carter looked up, his weathered face showing little emotion. Free country. Jack sat down. Jack Harrison. I help organize this event. Bill Carter. But I guess you already knew that. Jack smiled slightly. Olivia mentioned your name. Nice photo on the wall. Bill glanced at the picture. Long time ago. Vietnam. Da Nang. 68 to 70. Jack nodded. Thank you for your service. Bill studied Jack for a moment. You served too. Where? Afghanistan, Iraq, other places I can't talk. About SEALs, right? Frank told me about what happened, about how you and your team responded. Jack shrugged. We take care of our own. Bill looked around the bar. Never thought I'd see something like this here. Spent 40 years not talking about Vietnam. Most people don't want to hear it anyway. Maybe that's changing, Jack suggested. Maybe it's time people listened. As they talked, the door opened and Daniel Clark walked in, followed by Sam Wright and 3 other members of the team who could make it. Frank greeted them warmly, much different from his attitude a month ago. The team is at the back table, he told them, pointing to where Jack sat with Bill. Daniel nodded his thanks and headed that way, the others following. Room for a few more? Daniel asked when they reached the table. Bill looked up at the newcomers. You must be the rest of the SEAL team I've heard about. Just a few of us, Daniel replied as they pulled up chairs. The others are scattered across the country, but we stay in touch. Across the room, a young woman in her 20s entered the bar hesitantly. She looked around, clearly uncomfortable, until Olivia approached her. Welcome to Veterans Haven. I'm Olivia. Are you a veteran? The young woman shook her head. No, but my husband was. Army. He died last year. I saw the flyer that said families were welcome too, but maybe this was a mistake. Olivia touched her arm gently. No mistake. You absolutely belong here. She led the woman to a table near Jack's group. I lost my brother 2 years ago. Marine Corps. Sometimes it helps to talk to people who understand. Throughout the evening, more people arrived. Some came alone, others in groups. A few brought family members. There was no formal program, no speeches, just people finding each other, sharing stories or simply sitting in comfortable silence with those who understood. Frank moved through the crowd, refilling drinks, introducing people, making sure everyone felt welcome. He stopped at Jack's table where the group had grown to include several Vietnam veterans talking with the SEALs. Never thought I'd see the day when my bar would be full of military folks and I'd be happy about it, Frank said, shaking his head in wonder. Jack smiled. People can change. Speaking of change, Frank said, I wanted to show you something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph of a young man in a Vietnam-era Army uniform. My dad. His name was Paul Miller. This is the only picture I have of him from that time. Jack studied the photo. The man looked young and confident, not yet marked by the experiences that would change him. I'd like to put it on the wall, Frank said. If that's okay. It's more than okay, Jack replied. It belongs there. As midnight approached, the bar was still half full. No one seemed eager to leave. The young widow was talking with 2 other military spouses, exchanging phone numbers. Bill Carter was showing Daniel photos he'd kept hidden in a drawer for decades. Everywhere, connections were being made. Jack stood near the wall of photos looking at the faces of men and women from different eras, different branches, different wars, all united by their service. Frank joined him. We did good, didn't we? Did, Jack agreed. But this is just the beginning. Next month will be even better, Frank said. I've been thinking about adding a job board. A lot of these folks are looking for work, and some of the local businesses are looking for good people. Jack nodded. That's a great idea. We could also set up a resource table with information about VA benefits, medical services, counseling options. You know, Frank said. When you guys first walked in here a month ago, I thought you came for revenge. Never expected this. Sometimes the strongest response isn't force, Jack said. Sometimes it's building something good. The evening wound. down slowly. As the last guests left, Jack, Daniel, and the other SEALs helped clean up. They worked with the same quiet efficiency they brought to military operations, leaving the bar spotless. "Same time next month?" Frank asked as they prepared to leave. Jack looked at his former teammates, then back at Frank. "We'll be here." Outside, the night was clear and cool. Jack looked up at the stars, feeling more at peace than he had in months. The transition to civilian life was still challenging, but he no longer faced it alone. He had found a new mission, not one of war but of healing, not just for himself but for others like him. As the team walked together down the quiet street, Jack realized that the strength he had always valued in his SEAL team wasn't just about their ability to face danger. It was about their capacity to stand together, to adapt, to transform challenges into opportunities. And now, that strength was building something that would last far longer than any single mission. The Rusty Anchor had become more than just a bar. It had become a harbor for those who had served, a place of understanding, connection, and hope, a true veteran's haven.